Welcome back, fellow folklorists, for another look at the lore of the Fountainhead Palace. We've already covered quite a few things about the Fountainhead Palace so far. We've seen how the nobles ended up in their current state and how the Okami came to be involved with the palace, as well as the reason for their different appearances. There are still a few loose ends we need to tie together though, and there's a strange group in the Fountainhead who can help us do just that. This will be a tale about the rewards of patience and perseverance, as well as a warning to those who would steal it away given the chance. This is the lore of the pot nobles and the Great Colored Carp. Let's start by taking a look at the master himself, the Great Colored Carp, and where he came from. We can tell from his appearance and talking to the pot nobles that he used to be human. We also know from the bottom of the Fountainhead Lake that the Great Colored Carp we see in the game is not the first, or at least wasn't the only one. So who was the first then, and how did he become a carp? More than likely, the first Great Carp, or master, was a noble who raised carp himself. You see, carp originally came to Japan from China and were a common source of food. During the Heian period though, the nobility started to notice that some carp had very distinct colors and began to raise these carp as pets. The first master probably had plenty of these carp of his own when the divine dragon first arrived. After the dragon's arrival, while other nobles were striving to become like the old dragons of the tree, the master instead continued to diligently care for his own pet carp, admiring their striking appearance, until the day he noticed some of the transformed nobles grew scales of their own. To the master, this must have been a dream come true. He may not have desired the dragon-like appearance of the other nobles, but these scaled nobles offered him a chance to more closely resemble his own beloved carp. Realizing this, he would have gladly transformed into one of them as soon as he was able. I have to imagine the master would have been happy with his new form. His facial hair becoming like the long whiskers of a carp, the extra set of limbs and tails that mimic their fins, and of course his shimmering scales that match the brightly colored scales of his beloved pets. Over time, he would even start to wear their scales as his own, so that he could be even more like them. He wouldn't have even considered it a hindrance once he started to breathe water, which would have required staying in a large pot whenever he was on the surface. Once he had collected enough of the scales of his beloved carp though, he was finally transformed into a Great Colored Carp. Now, like them, he could swim alongside his beloved pets even as he grew larger and larger until he one day dwarfed them in size. However, such a transformation clearly drew the attention of the other palace nobles. Some of the other nobles would have coveted such a transformation, since the Great Colored Carp seemed to only grow larger with time without aging. Along with its immortality, many nobles may have also been aware of the shared connection between carps and dragons. You see, there's a famous tale from China which states that a carp that can jump a waterfall, the Dragon's Gate in the original tale, can become a dragon. So perhaps these nobles knew of the tale and considered an immortal carp as the next best thing to becoming one of the old dragons. Either way, we know that other nobles tried to emulate their new master, and judging from the number of giant carp skeletons we see, at least some were successful. They also seem to hold a certain reverence for the Great Colored Carp since they appointed attendants to care for them. However, it seems that even the Great Colored Carps were not safe from the nobles' scheming attempts at immortality, and their downfall would come at the hands of two different groups. The first of these groups came not from the nobles themselves, but from outsiders such as the Okami, in particular, Priestess Yao. But before I go on, I should clarify something from my last video. In my video about the Okami, I called Priestess Yao the head priestess of the Okami, but that's actually a mistranslation. In this case, priestess doesn't actually refer to a role as a priestess, but rather it describes something similar to a Buddhist nun. This is important to note for two reasons. The first is to show that Yao is meant to be a version of Yao Bikuni, a famous Buddhist nun who ate the flesh of a mermaid and lived to be 800 before choosing to pass away despite her immortal body. They have a lot in common since they are both of the Buddhist faith and both are considered to be immortal. Also like Yao Bikuni, Priestess Yao obtained her immortality from eating the flesh of a different kind of mermaid, the Great Colored Carp. I know, not exactly Ariel, is he? This is because in the tale, Yao Bikuni actually ate the flesh of a ningyo. The term ningyo is generally used to describe mermaids. Taken literally though, it simply means fish person, which could describe the Great Colored Carp. So how did eating the flesh of the Great Carp grant her immortality? Well, we can see from the bottom of the lake that the centipedes seem to have some kind of close relationship to the Great Carp. Given that the centipedes can parasitize humans and apes, it would seem that their original hosts were the Great Carp, and Yao became infected once she ate their flesh, just like in the tale of Yao Bakuni. Yao's Buddhist connection is also important because it may explain why one of the most infested areas of the game is so overrun with centipedes. Given her Buddhist faith and the Japanese maple that grow around the bridge where we fight her, it seems that Yao had ties to Senpo Temple. Most likely, she shared the Great Colored Carp's flesh with them, which led to at least the initial infestation of Senpo Temple. But we can focus on their story another time. Either way, it seems that Yao and the Senpo monks at least benefited directly from the death of a Great Colored Carp, even if they weren't directly involved with its death themselves. However, as outsiders, they were not the greatest threat to the Great Carps. Their real threat instead came from the very nobles who called them master in the first place. In the game, we encounter two of these pot nobles, Harunaga and Koromori. Whether they are the only pot nobles left, or just the only we happen to encounter, both of them have a similar goal in mind. They only desire to collect more treasure scales, and they will trade valuable goods for them. Once they've gathered enough scales though, they will each provide you with their own truly precious bait, and make a special request of you to feed it to the Great Colored Carp. If you listen to either of them and feed the Great Carp the truly precious bait, however, the Great Carp will die. Afterwards, when you reunite with the pot noble you sided with, their true goal becomes clear, as they have now transformed into a carp themselves. But if you pay close attention, you'll see their new form isn't the happy ending that they would have hoped for. Our first hint that things are amiss are their glowing red eyes. We only encounter one other carp in the game that has red eyes like this, and we can even collect their eyes for a separate quest. The item description of the red carp eyes tell us that carp with these eyes can never become masters, and that they have an incomplete number of scales. This is backed up by the pot noble's demand for more scales even after they have transformed. This may seem a tragic fate for the pot nobles, but instead it's actually a fitting end for them. Rather than wait until they had collected the vast number of scales that were necessary for a proper transformation, they instead tried to force it. I don't know if killing the Great Carp was a necessary step, or if they were just afraid of being the little fish in a big pond, but they grew impatient and have you kill the Great Carp instead. Koromori even has the gall to criticize Harunaga for such a despicable act before asking you to do the exact same favor for him. Unfortunately, if they'd been more familiar with the tale of the carp that leapt over the waterfall, they may have avoided such a tragic fate. In the original tale, it's true that carp that choose to persevere and reach the top of the Dragon's Gate are transformed into real dragons. However, the carp who give up are instead forced to remain as normal carp forever. The moral of this tale is that one's own perseverance and hard work are key to achieving your goals, no matter how out of reach they may seem. Those who balk at the effort are never going to change or make progress. That's why the pot nobles only transform into incomplete carp and will never become great carp themselves in spite of all of their scheming. Maybe they should have actually tried to learn from their master instead of planning for his downfall. As a result, the tale of the Great Carp ends with the master's death, an incomplete carp, and a pot noble who most likely dies of grief after feeling like he missed his one chance at immortality. However, there is one good ending to this story, as the attendant, now free from his eternal post, has the chance to reunite with one of his daughters one last time. A bittersweet end, to be sure. Well, with that, we've covered just about everything there is about the Fountainhead Palace, except for that, and that, and that. Alright, I get it. So there's still a few strange things that require explanation in the Fountainhead Palace that we'll have to cover in a separate video. So make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get updated when new lore videos come out. Until next time, my fellow folklorists.